Hey there. Welcome to Midnight Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So before you get cozy, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. The last train to Briar Hollow always ran late. No one complained. In fact, most people avoided it entirely. The Briar Hollow line cut through miles of isolated countryside, passing forgotten farmland, abandoned industrial sites, and thick woodland where cell phone signals faded into nothing. The train itself was an aging commuter service. Steel cars that rattled with every turn, fluorescent lights that flickered unpredictably, and an eerie quiet that made even seasoned travelers uneasy. But on October 17th, the train carried a passenger who would never reach her destination. And her disappearance would uncover a mystery buried beneath decades of secrets. The final boarding. 24-year-old Emily Carter arrived at Howard Central Station at 10:42 p.m., 15 minutes before the last Briar Hollow train departed. Security cameras captured her moving briskly through the nearly empty terminal, clutching her navy duffel bag and glancing over her shoulder more than once. Emily wasn't just traveling home. She was running from something. Earlier that day, Emily had abruptly quit her job as a junior archivist at the Howard Historical Records Department. According to co-workers, she seemed shaken, distracted, and unusually pale. She refused to explain why she was leaving, simply telling her supervisor she needed to go home immediately. Home meant Briar Hollow, a small rural town where Emily had grown up before leaving for college and never looking back. Until now. The ticket clerk later told investigators that Emily's hands trembled when she purchased her one-way ticket. She kept asking if the train would stop anywhere unusual, the clerk recalled. I thought she meant delays or maintenance stops. But she asked it 3 different times, like she was afraid of something. The train ride. Train 309 departed Howard Station at exactly 10:57 p.m. Only 6 passengers boarded that night. Security footage showed them clearly. An elderly man carrying grocery bags, a construction worker still in dusty boots, a college student wearing headphones, a middle-aged woman reading a paperback novel, a tall man in a dark overcoat standing near the back of the platform, and Emily Carter. At 11:03 p.m., the train disappeared into the rural stretch where signal coverage became unreliable. Standard procedure meant the onboard cameras stored footage internally, later uploaded when the train returned to the main station. But when train 309 arrived in Briar Hollow at 12:41 a.m., Emily Carter was gone. The missing passenger, the train conductor, Harold Briggs, was the first to notice. He had walked through each car performing his routine exit check. When he reached car 3, he spotted Emily's navy duffel bag resting neatly on a seat near the window. But the seat beside it was empty. Briggs initially assumed she had stepped into the restroom or moved cars. However, after checking the entire train twice, he realized something was very wrong. The emergency door sensors showed no alerts. No one had exited the train between stations, and there were no unscheduled stops. Emily Carter had vanished inside a moving train. The investigation begins. Detective Lila Monroe received the call at 2:13 a.m. Lila specialized in missing persons cases and had built a reputation for solving disappearances others considered unsolvable. She arrived at Briar Hollow Station just before dawn, greeted by cold air and uneasy silence that clung to the deserted platform. The train still sat on track 2, waiting, almost like it knew it held answers. Lila stepped aboard with her partner, Detective Aaron Pike. The interior lights hummed faintly as they examined the passenger car where Emily had last been seen. Her duffel bag remained exactly where Briggs described. Inside they found a folded change of clothes, a wallet containing ID and cash, a train ticket stub, and a sealed manila envelope labeled only with Emily's name. Lila carefully opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies of old municipal records, land deeds, zoning permits, and building schematics dated back nearly 40 years. One document had been circled repeatedly in red ink. Briar Hollow Underground Utility Expansion, Phase 3. Lila frowned. What kind of utility project needs underground blueprints this detailed? Aaron asked. Lila didn't answer immediately. Something about the documents made her uneasy. It wasn't just their age. It was the fact that several pages appeared deliberately removed. Someone didn't want the full project seen. The other passengers. By mid-morning, Lila had interviewed the remaining 5 passengers. The elderly man remembered seeing Emily briefly, but said she spent most of the ride staring out the window. The construction worker admitted he had fallen asleep halfway through the journey. The college student never removed his headphones and claimed he noticed nothing unusual. The woman reading the novel said Emily appeared nervous but quiet. Then there was the tall man in the overcoat. He had boarded last and exited first when the train reached Briar Hollow, and no one could remember seeing his face clearly. Security footage confirmed his presence, but his features were partially obscured by the station's dim lighting and the collar of his coat raised high against his jawline. Even stranger, there was no ticket record under his description. The train footage. When investigators retrieved the onboard camera recordings, they expected simple confirmation of Emily's movements. Instead, they found something disturbing. At 11:29 p.m., Emily sat alone in car 3, flipping through the documents from her envelope. Her eyes darted nervously toward the aisle as though she sensed someone watching her. Then, at 11:37 p.m., the lights in car 3 flickered. Only for 2 seconds, but when they returned to normal, Emily was no longer in her seat. Her bag remained untouched. There was no sign of struggle, no visible person approaching her, no movement captured near the emergency exits. She simply was gone. A town with a history. Lila began researching Briar Hollow's past. What she discovered raised more questions than answers. In the late 1980s, Briar Hollow underwent a controversial redevelopment project involving underground infrastructure expansion, officially described as sewage and utility modernization. However, several contractors connected to the project disappeared under mysterious circumstances over the following years. Local news archives described them as workplace accidents or voluntary disappearances. But the patterns were chilling. Every missing person had access to underground construction areas, and every case had quietly faded without resolution. Emily's hidden connection. Later that afternoon, Lila visited Emily's childhood home, now occupied by her estranged aunt, Margaret Carter. Margaret appeared nervous when detectives mentioned Emily's return to town. "She should have stayed away," Margaret whispered. "Stayed away from what?" Lila asked. Margaret hesitated before answering. Emily's father worked on that underground expansion. He was an engineer on the project. He died when she was 10. Officially, it was a structural collapse. Lila leaned forward. Unofficially? Margaret swallowed hard. "He told my sister he had found something buried under Briar Hollow. Something they weren't supposed to disturb. 2 weeks later, he was dead." The map. Before leaving, Margaret handed Lila a faded photograph Emily had mailed her 3 days earlier. It showed a hand-drawn map of Briar Hollow's underground tunnel system, far more detailed than any public records. At the bottom of the map, Emily had written one chilling sentence. "They never sealed it. They just built over it." The final clue of the night. That evening, while reviewing surveillance from Howard Station again, Aaron noticed something overlooked earlier. As Emily waited on the platform before boarding the train, the tall man in the overcoat stood behind a column, watching her. Completely still. Not moving. Not blinking. Almost as if he had been waiting specifically for her arrival. Then, seconds before boarding, he leaned toward Emily and whispered something into her ear. Emily's entire posture stiffened instantly. She turned, staring directly at him with visible fear. Yet she boarded the train anyway. The words no one heard. The station camera captured no audio. But forensic lip readers later studied Emily's reaction frame by frame. After the man spoke to her, Emily quietly mouthed 3 words. Words that would haunt Detective Lila Monroe for the rest of the investigation. "It's still open." The last train to Briar Hollow continued running every night. But after Emily Carter vanished, fewer and fewer passengers dared to board, because whispers began spreading across the region that beneath Briar Hollow, something long buried had begun opening again. By sunrise, Briar Hollow looked like any other quiet rural town. Morning fog drifted lazily between rows of aging brick storefronts. A handful of early risers shuffled into the local diner. The last train from Howard sat empty on track 2, its metal frame cooling in the pale autumn air. But for Detective Lila Monroe, the town felt wrong. Too still. Too careful. Almost like it was holding its breath. A map that shouldn't exist. Lila sat inside the temporary investigation office, set up in Briar Hollow's small police station, studying Emily Carter's hand-drawn map under a desk lamp. Aaron Pike stood beside her, arms crossed, studying the faded lines and scribbled notes. The map detailed an underground tunnel network far larger than any official record showed. Some sections were marked with red XS, others labeled with strange annotations like, "Collapse but hollow beneath." Access sealed, reinforced concrete. Ventilation shafts remain active. But one marking drew Lila's attention. A circled location directly beneath Briar Hollow's abandoned municipal water facility. And next to it, Emily had written, "Primary entrance?" Aaron leaned closer. "You think she found a way down there?" Lila nodded slowly. Or she thought someone else had. The water facility. The Briar Hollow Municipal Water Treatment Plant sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by rusted chain-link fencing and faded warning signs that read, "Condemned, structural instability." The facility had been shut down 15 years earlier after contamination concerns forced the town to switch to a regional water supply. Since then, the building had been left to decay, its cracked concrete walls stained by years of neglect. When Lila and Aaron arrived, wind whistled through broken windows, carrying the faint smell of stagnant water and rust. "This place screams bad idea," Aaron muttered. "Most good leads do," Lila replied. Breaking inside, the front entrance was locked and reinforced with welded metal bars. But the rear maintenance door hung slightly ajar, its lock clearly broken long ago. Inside, the air felt damp and heavy. Old filtration tanks loomed like hollow giants, their interiors drained and coated with mineral residue. The floors creaked under every step. Lila studied Emily's map again, aligning it with the building's layout. "If this is accurate," she said quietly, "the tunnel entrance should be beneath the main filtration basin." They moved cautiously toward the massive circular basin at the center of the facility. At first glance, it appeared empty, just a cracked concrete floor and scattered debris. But then Aaron noticed something unusual. "Look at the dust pattern," he said, crouching near the edge. "Footprints. Recent ones. The concealed hatch." Following the footprints led them to a large steel panel embedded into the basin floor. It was camouflaged with debris and corrosion, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Aaron wiped away rust and dirt. The panel revealed a recessed handle, and beside it, the same jagged circle symbol investigators had seen scribbled in Emily's documents. Lila's pulse quickened. "She found this," Lila whispered. "She came here before boarding that train." Aaron tugged the handle. The panel groaned as it lifted, revealing a narrow metal staircase descending into darkness. Cold air rushed upward, carrying a stale, earthy smell that felt older than the building itself. Descending below Briar Hollow, flashlights cut through the blackness as Lila and Aaron carefully descended the staircase. The temperature dropped noticeably with every step. At the bottom, they stepped into a concrete corridor reinforced with aging steel beams. Rust coated the walls, but the tunnel itself appeared structurally sound, far too well preserved for something abandoned decades ago. Then Lila noticed something that made her stop cold. The corridor lights flickered on overhead, not fully operational, but dimly glowing. Aaron's voice dropped. "That means power's still running down here." "Which means someone's maintaining it," Lila replied. Evidence of recent activity. The tunnel stretched deeper underground, branching into multiple directions. Along the walls, faded construction markings labeled sections with municipal project codes from the 1980s. But beneath those faded markings, newer symbols had been drawn. Crude arrows, directional notes, and once again the jagged circle emblem. "Someone's using these tunnels," Aaron said quietly. Lila nodded. "And they don't want them found." The storage chamber. Following the arrows led them to a large underground storage chamber filled with stacked crates, old equipment, and metal shelving units. At first glance, it looked like leftover construction storage. Then Aaron opened one of the crates. Inside were modern supplies. Flashlights, batteries, medical kits, bottled water, blankets. "Emergency stockpile," Aaron said. "Or holding supplies." Lila scanned the room carefully. Near the back wall sat a folding chair facing a small metal table. On the table rested a handheld radio transmitter and a notebook filled with dates and times. Surveillance logs. Some entries were labeled with train numbers, including Train 309. Emily's handwriting. Lila flipped through the notebook. Halfway through, she froze. Several entries were written in different handwriting styles, but the final page belonged to Emily Carter. Her handwriting was unmistakable. The message read, "He's watching the trains, choosing passengers, using the tunnels to intercept them." Below it, Emily had scribbled another line repeatedly, as if written in panic. "There are more entrances. He's not alone." A sound in the darkness. Suddenly, a faint metallic echo rang through the tunnels. Both detectives froze. Another sound followed. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Coming from deeper within the underground network. Aaron raised his flashlight toward the corridor. "Police! Show yourself!" Silence answered him. Then the overhead lights flickered again and went out. The chase begins. Emergency backup lights flickered dimly along the tunnel ceiling, casting long, distorted shadows across the corridor. Lila and Aaron heard the footsteps again, faster now. Running. Away from them. "Someone's down here," Aaron shouted. They sprinted toward the sound, navigating the twisting tunnel network guided only by fading emergency lights and echoing footsteps ahead. The tunnels branched repeatedly, forcing them to choose directions blindly. Then they reached an intersection where fresh footprints split into two separate corridors. Lila crouched, examining them quickly. "One path is heavier. Someone carrying weight," she said. "The other is lighter, possibly a lookout." Aaron hesitated. "We should call backup." Lila shook her head. "If they disappear deeper into the network, we may never find them again." The locked door. They followed the heavier footprints, which led them to a reinforced steel door partially hidden behind collapsed debris. The door was sealed with an electronic keypad, but the keypad lights were still active. Aaron tried random codes. Nothing. Lila scanned the door frame and noticed something scratched faintly into the metal surface. 3 numbers. 3 to 0, a 9. "The train number," she whispered. Aaron entered it. The keypad beeped, and the heavy door slowly unlocked with a grinding mechanical click. The empty chamber. Inside the chamber, they found what appeared to be a temporary holding area. Metal restraints bolted into walls, scattered blankets, and discarded water bottles. But it was empty, except for one thing. A navy fabric strap torn from Emily's duffel bag. Lila picked it up carefully, her jaw tightening. "She was here," she said. "And recently," Aaron added. "The escape tunnel." At the far end of the chamber, a ventilation shaft had been forcibly widened, its metal frame bent outward. Fresh tool marks glinted along the edges. "They escaped through there," Aaron said. Lila shined her flashlight into the shaft. The tunnel extended farther underground, far beyond the municipal maps or Emily's hand-drawn version. Whoever built this system had expanded it secretly, over years, maybe decades. The realization. Lila leaned against the chamber wall, her mind racing. "This isn't just a kidnapping route," she said slowly. "It's an entire underground transportation system. Hidden, maintained, used to move people, without anyone above ground knowing." Aaron's face darkened. "You're saying someone's been using Briar Hollow like a funnel, taking victims from trains, roads anywhere nearby, and disappearing them underground." Lila nodded. "And Emily found it, which means she wasn't just running home. She was trying to expose it, the final discovery of the night." As they prepared to retreat and call for reinforcements, Aaron noticed something wedged beneath one of the metal restraints. He pulled it free. It was a torn piece of notebook paper, written in Emily's handwriting. "He's not the leader, just the collector." Below that, Emily had drawn a crude symbol neither detective had seen before. A triangle, with 3 dots inside it. Lila stared at the symbol, unease creeping through her chest. If Emily was right, then the man in the overcoat wasn't the mastermind. He was only the beginning, and somewhere beneath Briar Hollow, someone far more powerful was still waiting. The cold air inside the abandoned chamber clung to Detective Lila Monroe's lungs as she stared at Emily Carter's final note. The jagged handwriting, the triangle symbol with 3 dots, and the chilling sentence echoed inside her mind. He's not the leader, just the collector. Aaron Pike folded the paper carefully into an evidence sleeve, his expression tight with concern. If that's true, Aaron said quietly, then whoever is running this operation is still out there, and they've been doing it long enough to build this entire underground system. Lila nodded slowly, scanning the ventilation shaft that disappeared into deeper darkness. The tunnel system already exceeded anything found in municipal blueprints. But something about the chamber's layout felt deliberate, organized, controlled, almost professional. This wasn't built randomly, she said. This was engineered. Reinforcements arrive. Within 2 hours, Briar Hollow police, state investigators, and structural engineers arrived at the water facility. Floodlights illuminated the condemned building as forensic teams began cataloging evidence. Sheriff Daniel Crow, Briar Hollow's longtime law enforcement authority, stepped inside the facility with a grim expression. His broad frame filled the hallway as he removed his hat respectfully. "I've been policing this town for 23 years, Crow said, glancing around the decaying filtration room. "And I swear to you, Detective Monroe, I had no idea any of this existed." Lila studied him carefully. His shock appeared genuine. "Then someone went to extreme lengths to keep it hidden," she replied, "engineering the impossible." Structural experts spent hours analyzing the tunnels. Their conclusions unsettled everyone involved. These passageways were originally constructed as municipal utility corridors, one engineer explained. But someone reinforced them later, professionally. Additional steel beams, modern ventilation systems, concealed electrical wiring. This isn't amateur work. How long would something like this take to build? Aaron asked. The engineer hesitated. Decades, possibly longer. Following the ventilation shaft. Rescue teams widened the ventilation shaft Emily's captors had escaped through. Equipped with breathing gear and advanced lighting systems, Lila, Aaron, and a tactical team prepared to descend further into the unknown network. The shaft sloped downward at a steep angle before opening into another tunnel. This one noticeably different. The concrete here was smoother, cleaner, newer, and unlike the older municipal corridors, this tunnel contained polished rail tracks embedded into the floor. Lila froze as her flashlight beam traced the rails disappearing into darkness. "This isn't just a tunnel," Aaron whispered. "It's a transportation route," Lila replied. "The hidden rail system." The team followed the tracks cautiously. Overhead, a narrow electric rail system ran parallel to the tracks, designed to power small transport carts. The design resembled industrial, mining railways used to move materials underground. Except this system showed signs of frequent use. Fresh wheel marks scarred the rails. Oil residue glistened along connection joints. Electrical wiring hummed faintly overhead. "This was built to move cargo," Aaron said. Lila swallowed hard. "Or people." The subterranean platform. Half a mile into the tunnel, the corridor widened into an underground platform resembling a miniature train station. Metal benches lined the walls. Supply crates were stacked neatly in one corner. Overhead lighting fixtures cast dim yellow glows across the chamber. But the most disturbing discovery sat at the center of the platform. A compact rail transport cart rested on the tracks, large enough to hold 6 to 8 passengers. Straps and restraints were bolted into its interior. Aaron cursed under his breath. They were moving victims through here like freight shipments. Lila stepped closer to the cart, noticing identification numbers etched into the metal frame. The numbers were coded, but forensic specialists quickly recognized something chilling. Each code matched dates and locations of unsolved missing person cases across 3 neighboring counties. The 30-year timeline. Forensic analysts began cross-referencing the numbers with national missing persons databases. The results stunned everyone. The earliest match dated back 32 years. Over 70 disappearances across multiple states aligned with the coded transport system. "This isn't a local operation," Aaron said grimly. "This is regional," Lila corrected. "Maybe even national." Emily's trail. Near the platform benches, investigators discovered more evidence of Emily's presence. Scratches along the metal bench appeared to form words, crudely carved with something sharp. Lila knelt beside them, tracing the faint markings. They transfer them below ground. Below that, Emily had carved another message. "Collector brings them." Triangle decides. Aaron stared at the symbol again. The triangle has to be leadership, a hierarchy, or something worse, Lila said quietly. A locked cargo chamber. Beyond the platform, the tracks led to a large steel cargo bay sealed with reinforced doors. Industrial locking mechanisms required manual override from both sides. After breaching the lock, the team discovered storage containers lining the walls. Most were empty, but one container held personal belongings. Hundreds of items. Wallets, jewelry, clothing, photographs, identification cards, all labeled, cataloged, and stored in plastic evidence sleeves. Victims' belongings. The chamber felt less like storage, and more like a museum of stolen lives. Lila's chest tightened as she carefully lifted a child's sneaker from one container. They documented everything, she whispered. They kept trophies. The surveillance room. Adjacent to the cargo chamber, investigators uncovered a small surveillance control room. Multiple monitors lined the walls, though most were powered down. Technicians restored partial power to the system. What appeared on screen horrified everyone present. Live camera feeds, not from the tunnels, from multiple train stations across the region. Howard Central, North Vale Transit, Silverton Rail Yard, and several smaller rural platforms. They've been monitoring passengers, Aaron said. Selecting targets, Lila added. The collector's role. Reviewing archived footage, investigators found repeated appearances of the tall man in the overcoat across several train stations spanning years. Always watching. Always observing specific passengers, never boarding the trains until his chosen target appeared. He's been hunting systematically, Aaron said, and delivering victims to the underground network, Lila replied. Just like Emily wrote, the unexpected recording. While searching archived system files, technicians discovered an encrypted audio recording labeled simply, Triangle Session 12. After bypassing the security encryption, the recording played through the chamber speakers. 3 distorted voices echoed through static interference. We require additional transfers this quarter. The collector is falling behind schedule. Then remind him of his replacement options. The voices fell silent briefly before one final sentence echoed through the recording. No failure reaches the surface. The growing realization. Silence filled the chamber after the recording ended. Aaron exhaled slowly. There are at least 3 leaders. Lila nodded. And they operate through collectors like the man in the overcoat. Which means dismantling this network won't stop with capturing one kidnapper, Aaron said. It means dismantling an entire organization. The emergency signal. Suddenly, one of the technicians shouted from the surveillance console. Detectives, we've got movement. A live feed activated automatically, showing a tunnel camera deep within the underground system. The image flickered, but it clearly revealed something moving along the tracks. Another transport cart, heading deeper underground, carrying passengers, bound passengers, and standing beside them, the tall man in the overcoat. The race against time. Lila grabbed her radio instantly. All units, prepare pursuit. We have visual confirmation of the collector transporting victims through the underground rail system. Aaron checked the rail control panel beside the platform. These tracks branch into multiple tunnel routes, he said. If he reaches the deeper junctions, we'll lose him completely. Lila turned toward the tactical team. Then we stop him before he reaches them. The final image. Before the surveillance feed cut to static, the camera captured one final chilling detail. As the cart passed beneath a light fixture, one of the bound passengers lifted her head slightly. Her face bruised but unmistakable. Emily Carter. Alive. Lila's heart pounded as she stared at the frozen frame. She's still down there, she whispered. And if Emily's right, Aaron said, then they're taking her somewhere even deeper, Lila finished. Somewhere beyond municipal tunnels. Beyond documented maps. Somewhere designed to ensure victims never returned to the surface again. The underground platform trembled slightly as Detective Lila Monroe stared at the frozen surveillance frame, showing Emily Carter bound inside the transport cart. The grainy image flickered, then vanished into static, leaving behind a silence heavy enough to crush breath from the room. Aaron Pike slammed his fist lightly against the control panel. Signal's gone. Lila didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the dead monitor, her mind racing through possibilities, timelines, escape routes. "How long ago was that feed?" she asked. One of the technicians checked the system logs. Approximately 7 minutes delay from live signal transmission. That cart is already deeper inside the tunnel network. Lila exhaled sharply. Then we're already behind. Mapping the unmapped. Engineers and analysts scrambled around the platform's control hub, cross-referencing old municipal plans with newly discovered tunnel schematics extracted from the surveillance servers. Most of the deeper tunnel system had no official documentation. It had been expanded secretly, likely over decades. Aaron stared at the evolving map displayed across 3 connected monitors. There's a junction point approximately 2 miles below town limits. Multiple track routes branch from there. Where do they lead? Lila asked. The technician hesitated. That's the problem. There's no recorded destination. Whoever built this intentionally removed endpoint data. Lila stepped closer, scanning the branching track layout. 3 routes diverged from the central junction, each marked with faint maintenance codes matching Emily's triangle symbol. 3 branches, Aaron said quietly. 3 leaders, Lila replied, preparing the pursuit. Tactical teams quickly armed themselves with breathing equipment, thermal scanners, and portable lighting units. Rescue medics prepared stretchers and emergency treatment kits, anticipating injured captives deeper underground. Sheriff Crow approached Lila, his face drawn tight with tension. "Detective, I've requested federal backup, but they're at least 3 hours out." Lila shook her head. "Emily and the others may not have 3 hours." Crow nodded slowly. "Then you have full jurisdiction. Bring them home." The underground rail chase. The tactical team loaded into the recovered transport cart, manually overriding its electric drive system. The motor hummed reluctantly before the cart began rolling along the steel tracks into the deeper tunnel corridor. Darkness swallowed them quickly. Emergency rail lights flickered sporadically along the passage, casting fragmented shadows across reinforced concrete walls. The air grew colder and damper as they descended further beneath Briar Hollow's surface. Aaron studied the motion sensor scanner in his lap. No heat signatures ahead yet, but these tunnels are massive. They could be anywhere. Lila kept her eyes fixed forward. He's moving toward that junction. That's our interception point. Echoes of the past. Halfway through the tunnel route, the team passed abandoned maintenance alcoves filled with rusted equipment and collapsed structural supports. Faded municipal logos painted along the walls dated back to early infrastructure development projects. But mixed among them were newer markings. Triangle symbols, directional arrows, and coded numbers corresponding to missing person cases. "They've been expanding this operation for decades," Aaron said grimly. "And refining it," Lila added. "Every disappearance helped them improve." The junction chamber. After nearly 20 minutes of continuous descent, the tunnel opened into an enormous circular chamber. The rails branched into 3 separate track corridors, each disappearing into a different reinforced tunnel passage. The chamber resembled a subterranean train terminal. Overhead catwalks crossed the cavern ceiling, while electrical conduits snaked along concrete pillars supporting the massive underground structure. Lila raised her flashlight slowly, scanning the scale of the chamber. "This wasn't just expanded," she whispered. "This was engineered from the beginning." Aaron checked the thermal scanner again. "There," he said suddenly, pointing toward the leftmost tunnel route. "Multiple heat signatures. Approximately 5 or 6 individuals. Moving slowly. Victims and escort," Lila said. "That's our route." The first ambush. As the team prepared to pursue the left corridor, sudden movement erupted above them. Figures appeared along the overhead catwalks, masked individuals dressed in dark tactical clothing. Gunfire erupted, echoing violently through the chamber. Tactical officers immediately returned fire, diving behind concrete pillars and abandoned supply crates. Bullets ricocheted across steel beams, showering sparks through the cavern. "They're protecting the junction," Aaron shouted. "Which means we're heading the right direction," Lila replied, ducking behind cover. "Breaking the defense." The firefight lasted several intense minutes before the attackers retreated deeper into the catwalk system, disappearing through maintenance ladders leading to unknown tunnel routes. 2 attackers were apprehended, restrained, and quickly interrogated on site. Both refused to speak, repeating only one phrase. The The triangle endures. Lila exchanged a glance with Aaron. Fanatics, he muttered. Or trained operatives, she corrected. Following the collector, the team resumed pursuit through the left tunnel branch. The corridor here appeared more modern, with polished flooring and active ventilation systems maintaining stable airflow. Fresh cart tracks scarred the rail surface. They passed here minutes ago, Aaron confirmed. The team accelerated their cart, pushing the motor beyond recommended speed limits. The vehicle rattled violently as it raced deeper into the underground network. The processing corridor. Eventually, the tunnel widened into a sterile corridor lined with locked containment rooms on both sides. Frosted observation windows allowed faint glimpses inside each chamber. Most rooms stood empty, but several contained disturbing remnants, discarded restraints, medical equipment, and examination tables. They weren't just holding victims, Aaron said quietly. They were studying them, or preparing them, Lila added grimly. Emily's signal. Suddenly, the motion scanner beeped rapidly. Multiple heat signatures directly ahead, Aaron announced. Less than 50 yards. The team dismounted the cart silently, weapons raised as they approached a reinforced double-door chamber at the corridor's end. From inside, muffled voices echoed faintly. And then, a sharp metallic clang followed by a woman's desperate scream. Emily's voice. The breach. Breach on my count, Lila ordered, her pulse pounding. The tactical team positioned themselves beside the steel doors. Explosive entry charges were placed precisely along the lock seams. 3, 2, 1. The charges detonated. The doors blasted inward as officers stormed the chamber with weapons drawn. The collector confronted. Inside, the tall man in the overcoat stood beside a partially loaded transport cart holding 4 bound victims, including Emily Carter. The collector turned slowly, his face partially revealed beneath the hood for the first time. Calm, unemotional, almost curious. You've come farther than most, he said evenly. Release them, Lila commanded, aiming her weapon directly at him. The collector tilted his head slightly. You misunderstand my role, detective. I don't decide their fate. The collector's warning. Aaron stepped forward cautiously. Then tell us who does. The collector's lips curled faintly into a thin smile. The triangle chooses. The surface only sees what we allow. Before the team could react, the collector slammed a control switch beside the cart. Steel barriers dropped from the ceiling, separating him from the victims and officers. He stepped backward toward a narrow escape corridor opening behind him. Stop! Lila shouted, but he vanished into darkness, rescuing Emily. Medics rushed to free the captives. Emily collapsed into Lila's arms, trembling violently but conscious. He's taking them deeper, Emily gasped. There's another facility, below even this level. They call it the core. Lila steadied her gently. You're safe now. We've got you. Emily shook her head weakly. No, you don't understand. The collector is expendable. Aaron's voice tightened. Expendable to who? Emily swallowed hard. To them. The final revelation. Before losing consciousness, Emily grabbed Lila's jacket and whispered one final warning. The core isn't just a facility. It's where they choose who disappears forever. As rescue teams evacuated the freed victims back toward the surface, Lila stood in the breached chamber, staring at the dark escape corridor where the collector had fled. She knew the truth now. Briar Hollow wasn't the end of the tunnel network. It was only the entrance. And somewhere far below them, the true architects of the disappearances were still waiting. The first thing Detective Mara Ellison noticed was the smell. It wasn't rot. It wasn't chemicals. It was something stranger, a stale mixture of damp wood, old paper, and a faint metallic tang that lingered at the back of her throat like the aftertaste of blood. She stood at the bottom of the narrow staircase, her flashlight beam slicing through the darkness below the Grayson Transit Authority's abandoned storage annex. Officer Daniel Ruiz hovered just behind her, one hand resting uneasily on his holster. You sure this is safe? Ruiz whispered. Mara didn't answer immediately. Her eyes stayed locked on the descending steps, each wooden plank bowed inward from years of neglect. The anonymous tip that led them here had been brief, almost cryptic. Look under the old annex. The commuters never left mile marker 37. 3 missing buses. 42 passengers. 6 months of dead leads. And now this. Mara stepped down. The stair creaked under her weight, the sound echoing down into the hollow beneath them. Ruiz followed, slower, more cautious, his flashlight sweeping the walls. Dust floated through the beams like drifting snow. Halfway down, Mara paused. "You hear that?" she asked. Ruiz froze. At first, there was nothing. Then, a faint rattling noise. Soft, irregular, like something brushing against metal or breathing through broken teeth. Ruiz swallowed. Probably rodents. Mara didn't respond. She continued down until her boots met concrete. The basement stretched farther than the annex blueprint suggested. Rows of metal shelving units stood like skeletons, most of them empty, others stacked with rusted transit equipment and decaying cardboard boxes. Ruiz moved beside her, sweeping his light across the far wall. "That wasn't in the plans," he said. Mara followed his beam. A reinforced steel door stood at the back of the basement. Thick, industrial, and disturbingly new compared to everything around it. Her stomach tightened. "Maintenance wouldn't install something like that," she murmured. Ruiz stepped closer. "There's no handle." He was right. The door had no external latch, only a biometric scanner embedded into the wall beside it. Mara crouched beside it, brushing dust away with her glove. The scanner flickered weakly, still receiving power from somewhere. "How is this still running?" Ruiz asked. Mara didn't answer. She was studying the faint serial numbers etched beneath the scanner panel. Her breath caught. "Daniel," she said quietly. "What? This isn't transit equipment." He leaned closer. "What is it?" She hesitated before answering. "Private security. High-end. The kind used in black site facilities." Ruiz's face paled slightly. "You're saying someone built a secure room under a public transit annex, without anyone noticing?" "I'm saying someone wanted it hidden." Silence swallowed them. Ruiz exhaled slowly. "Can you open it?" Mara pulled a compact multi-tool from her belt and began removing the scanner's outer casing. "Not the proper way," she admitted. "But if it still has residual power, I might be able to bypass the lock." Ruiz nodded, though his fingers tightened around his flashlight. Minutes passed. Dust drifted. That faint rattling sound returned, slightly louder now. Ruiz shifted uneasily. "Mara, I swear I keep hearing something from inside that room." She paused, listening. The noise came again, this time unmistakably rhythmic. Tap, 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 tap. Her pulse quickened. "Someone could be in there," Ruiz whispered. Mara forced herself to stay focused, reconnecting two severed wires inside the scanner. The screen flickered to life, bathing her face in pale blue light. "Access denied" flashed across it. "Come on," she muttered. She tried again, cycling through override protocols. The scanner buzzed angrily, then the door emitted a deep mechanical thunk. Both officers froze. A second later, the lock disengaged with a slow hydraulic hiss. The steel door crept open an inch. Then two. Then three. The smell hit them first. Not decay. Something worse. A suffocating mix of antiseptic and human confinement, like a hospital room sealed shut for decades. Ruiz covered his mouth. "Jesus!" Mara pushed the door open fully. The beam of her flashlight revealed a room that neither of them spoke about for several seconds. The chamber stretched at least 40 feet long, lined with reinforced glass observation panels. Old fluorescent lights flickered overhead, some dead, others casting sickly yellow halos across the floor. Inside the room were cages. Not animal cages. Not prison bars. Medical containment units. Each one large enough to hold a person, constructed from thick plexiglass reinforced with steel frames. There were 12 of them. 8 stood open and empty, 4 remained sealed shut. Ruiz's breath hitched. "Mara, are those?" "Yes," she whispered. Her legs moved before her mind caught up. She approached the nearest sealed unit. Inside, blankets lay crumpled in a corner. Medical tubing dangled from rusted brackets along the wall. A feeding port protruded from one side, its interior stained with something dark and dried. Ruiz moved to the next unit. "Mara, this one." She turned. The beam of his flashlight illuminated scratch marks, hundreds of them, etched deep into the interior plexiglass. Fingernail grooves, some broken midway through, as if whoever made them had lost strength. And beneath the scratches, words, written in smeared residue. Mara stepped closer, swallowing hard as she read them aloud. Still alive, please help us. Ruiz staggered back slightly. This can't be real. Mara forced herself to breathe. Count the open units, she said quietly. Ruiz scanned the room. 8. And how many commuters were confirmed on the second missing bus? He hesitated. 8. Her throat tightened. They moved deeper into the chamber. The third sealed unit contained something that made Ruiz curse under his breath. A skeletal mattress lay inside, but the far wall was covered with calendar markings. Tally scratches grouped in 5s, stretching from one corner of the wall to the other. Days, Mara whispered. Ruiz nodded slowly. Whoever was inside, they were counting days. Mara traced the marks with her flashlight. There were hundreds of them. Her stomach twisted. Then, a sound erupted behind them. A violent clang. Both officers spun around. The steel door they had entered through slammed shut. Ruiz ran toward it instantly, grabbing the handle seam, yanking hard. It didn't budge. Mara, he shouted. It locked. The overhead lights flickered violently. For one terrifying second, the room plunged into darkness. Then emergency lights flared to life, deep red, bathing everything in a pulsing crimson glow. Mara's heart hammered in her chest. Someone activated the lockdown, she said. Ruiz backed toward her. We're not alone down here. The intercom crackled overhead, its speaker coated in dust. A distorted voice bled through. You shouldn't have opened that door. Ruiz drew his weapon instantly, aiming at the ceiling speaker. Police! Identify yourself. Static answered him. Then the voice returned, calm, almost amused. You were never meant to find this place. Mara's mind raced. She scanned the chamber, searching for hidden cameras, vents, anything that could explain how someone knew they were here. Where are the commuters? She demanded, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her ribs. The speaker hissed softly. Some were useful. Ruiz's jaw clenched. And the others? Silence stretched for several seconds. Then, they broke. Mara felt the words slam into her chest like a physical blow. She stepped closer to the sealed containment units, her flashlight scanning their interiors more urgently now. That's when she saw movement. Unit 11. Her beam froze on it. A shape lay curled beneath a tattered blanket. For a moment, she thought it was debris shifting in the emergency lighting. Then the blanket moved again. Ruiz followed her gaze. Oh my God! Mara rushed to the control panel beside the unit, slamming her palm against its cracked interface. Hold on, she shouted, her voice trembling despite herself. We're getting you out. The figure inside stirred weakly, skeletal fingers emerging from beneath the blanket, pressing against the plexiglass. Ruiz lowered his weapon, stepping closer. Sir? Can you hear me? The figure's head lifted slightly, revealing a gaunt face, sunken eyes blinking against the red light. A man, barely alive. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Mara fought with the panel controls, wires sparking as she attempted another override. Come on, come on. Behind them, the intercom crackled again. You will not remove my subjects. Mara's hands froze. Subjects. Not victims. Not prisoners. Subjects. Ruiz's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You sick? The speaker cut him off. You have already compromised months of work. I cannot allow contamination. Mara's blood ran cold. Daniel, she whispered. He turned toward her. We need to get him out now. She jammed 2 exposed wires together. The containment unit beeped angrily. Access denied. Inside, the man pressed his face weakly against the glass, his lips forming silent words. Mara leaned closer, trying to read them. 3 words. Not the first. Her stomach dropped. Suddenly, alarms erupted throughout the chamber, shrill, deafening. Emergency sprinklers burst to life overhead, but instead of water, a thick mist sprayed into the room, swirling through the red light like toxic fog. Ruiz coughed instantly. Mara, that's not water. She grabbed his arm. Hold your breath. The mist thickened rapidly, filling the chamber with a chemical haze that burned her eyes and throat. Behind the plexiglass, the trapped man began pounding weakly against the containment unit, panic flashing across his hollow face. Mara slammed her fist against the control panel again, screaming in frustration. Stay with us, she shouted through the glass. but already her vision was blurring. Ruiz stumbled beside her, grabbing her shoulder as his knees buckled. "Mara, we need to go." Her lungs screamed for air as she fumbled for her radio, her fingers barely functioning. "Dispatch," she gasped. "Officer down, hidden facility. Under Grayson Annex, multiple victims." Her voice dissolved into coughing. Across the chamber, the intercom spoke one final time, its tone almost regretful. "I warned you not to open the door." The red lights pulsed faster. The mist swallowed the room. And as Mara's flashlight slipped from her weakening grip, its beam rolled across the containment unit, illuminating the man inside pressing his hand against the glass, leaving behind a single bloody handprint before everything faded into darkness. Sound returned before sight. A low, rhythmic hum vibrated through Mara Ellison's skull, pulsing in time with the pounding behind her eyes. Every breath felt heavy, dragging through her chest like her lungs had been lined with sandpaper. She tried to move. Pain answered immediately. Her wrists burned first, tight restraints biting into her skin. Her ankles followed, strapped down against something cold and metallic. Panic surged through her body like electricity, forcing her eyes open. The world above her swam into view. Fluorescent lights glared overhead, painfully bright after the suffocating red haze of the containment chamber. The ceiling was unfamiliar. Smooth white panels broken only by ventilation grates and thin black camera lenses embedded like watching eyes. Mara inhaled sharply. That was a mistake. Her throat ignited with raw, chemical burn. She coughed violently, her entire body jerking against the restraints. A voice spoke calmly from somewhere to her left. "Try not to fight it. Your lungs are still recovering." Mara forced her head to turn. Daniel Ruiz lay on a parallel examination table beside her. He was strapped down exactly the same way, an oxygen mask strapped across his face. His eyes were open, wide with terror and relief when they met hers. "Mara," he rasped through the mask. She tried to speak, but only managed a broken whisper. "You alive?" He nodded weakly. "Barely," he said. Mara scanned the room quickly. They were inside a medical suite, but not one belonging to any legitimate hospital. Stainless steel cabinets lined the walls, each labeled with sterile black lettering. Surgical instruments rested neatly on trays beside both tables. Monitors hummed softly, tracking their heart rates in glowing green lines. And standing at the far counter was a man. He faced away from them, methodically arranging syringes across a polished tray. He wore a dark gray lab coat, spotless and perfectly pressed. His hair was silver at the temples, trimmed neatly, and his posture radiated calm precision. Mara's pulse spiked. "You're the voice," she croaked. The man paused, then slowly turned. He looked ordinary, mid-50s, clean-shaven, thin-rimmed glasses resting perfectly on a narrow nose. The kind of face that could blend into any corporate boardroom or medical conference without attracting a second glance. Except for his eyes. They held a chilling stillness, emotionless, analytical, as though he were examining lab samples rather than two living human beings. "Yes," he said simply. "I am." Ruiz struggled against his restraints. "You're under arrest." The man raised a finger slightly. Ruiz's table released a sharp, electric pulse. Ruiz screamed, his body arching violently before collapsing back against the metal surface, gasping for air. Mara's stomach twisted in fury. "Touch him again," she hissed, "and I swear." "You will do nothing," the man replied calmly. "Your motor responses are still compromised." The sedative mist was calibrated specifically to prevent aggressive movement. Mara glared at him. "Who are you?" The man adjusted his glasses slightly. "Dr. Elias Varn," he said, "neurobehavioral researcher, formerly affiliated with several institutions that lacked the vision necessary to continue my work." Ruiz wheezed beside her. "You kidnapped civilians, tortured them." Dr. Varn tilted his head, as though considering the accusation academically. "I studied them," he corrected. Mara's voice dropped to ice. "You locked them in cages." "I placed them in controlled environmental stress chambers," he replied. "You starved them." "I observed the neurological effects of isolation and prolonged survival adaptation," he said evenly. Mara felt her nails dig into her palms. "You're insane." Dr. Varn gave a faint, almost amused smile. "History often labels pioneers that way." He picked up a tablet from the counter and tapped it twice. A holographic display flickered above the device, projecting rows of data: heart rates, brainwave scans, chemical levels. Mara recognized passenger photos embedded beside each data column. The missing commuters. Why buses? She demanded. Dr. Varn stepped closer, folding his hands behind his back like a lecturer addressing students. Controlled population sampling, he explained. Public transit passengers provide a remarkably diverse psychological cross-section. Age, profession, socioeconomic status, emotional stability. Each bus offered a unique experimental cohort. Ruiz groaned. You're talking about human beings like lab rats. Rats provide valuable neurological parallels, Varn replied calmly. Mara swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. The message inside the containment unit. Not the first. What did that mean? For the first time, something flickered behind Varn's eyes. Pride. The Grayson commuters were Phase 3, he said. Mara's blood ran cold. How many phases were there? She whispered. Varn didn't answer directly. Instead, he turned the tablet toward her. The screen shifted, revealing a scrolling archive of passenger manifests, dozens of them. Dates spanning nearly 9 years. Ruiz's voice trembled. You've been doing this for 9 years? 8 years, 7 months, Varn corrected politely. Mara felt nausea rising in her throat. Why weren't there reports? She asked. Missing busloads of people don't just disappear without headlines. Varn tapped the tablet again. Several government logos flashed across the screen. Faded, partially redacted, but unmistakable. Because they were never classified as mass disappearances, he said. Ruiz blinked. What? Most transit disappearances were recorded as isolated vehicle accidents, Varn explained. Several buses were reported lost during storm floods. One allegedly drove off a collapsed bridge that was never located. Another was classified as a mechanical fire. Mara stared at him in horror. You falsified disaster records. I corrected them, he said. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You had help. Varn smiled faintly. Research of this magnitude requires institutional blindness, he said. Ruiz stared at him. You mean corruption? I mean funding, Varn replied. Silence hung heavy between them. Mara forced herself to focus. The survivors, she said. The man in Unit 11. How many are still alive? Varn glanced toward the far wall of the lab. A section of it slid open silently. Behind it, a dim observation gallery stretched outward, separated by thick glass panels. Inside the adjacent room sat 5 individuals. Mara's breath caught. They looked wrong. All 5 sat in rigid silence, dressed in identical gray garments. Their skin was pale, almost translucent under the fluorescent lights. Their eyes stared forward, unfocused yet intensely alert, like prey animals listening for predators that weren't there. One woman twitched violently every few seconds, her fingers tapping the chair rhythmically, exactly the same pattern each time. Another man rocked back and forth, whispering something under his breath too quietly to hear. Ruiz whispered, "They're alive." "Remarkably so," Varn said. Mara's voice shook with fury. "You broke them." "I refined them," Varn corrected. Extended isolation rewires the brain. Survival instinct heightens. Fear response recalibrates. Emotional attachments dissolve, replaced by pure cognitive preservation. Ruiz glared at him. "You turned them into prisoners inside their own heads." Varn ignored him. "Humanity's greatest weakness," he continued calmly, "is emotional dependency. Remove it, and you create a mind capable of surviving environments that would destroy ordinary individuals." Mara stared at the survivors through the glass. "They're not survivors," she said quietly. "They're casualties." Varn sighed softly, as though disappointed. "You misunderstand progress, detective." Before she could respond, one of the survivors suddenly turned. His head snapped toward Mara with unnatural precision, as though he could sense her presence through the observation glass. Their eyes met. His lips parted, and in a voice hoarse from disuse, he whispered something that barely reached her ears through the glass barrier. "Run!" Mara's pulse spiked. Varn didn't notice. He was adjusting settings on his tablet, engrossed in new readings. But Mara saw it, the flicker of terror inside the survivor's eyes. Not fear of her, fear of Varn. Mara turned back to Ruiz. Their eyes locked in silent understanding. They needed to escape. Now. She shifted her wrist slowly, testing the restraint tension. The strap held firm, but she noticed something Varn hadn't. During her earlier struggle, one metal rivet on her wrist binding had partially loosened. The chemical mist had weakened her strength, but not eliminated it entirely. Carefully, she twisted her wrist again, ignoring the sharp sting as skin scraped against metal. Ruiz watched her subtly, realization dawning across his face. "Doctor," Ruiz said suddenly, forcing his voice steady. "If your experiments are so successful, why are they still here?" Varn looked up, mildly intrigued. Ruiz continued, buying time. "If they're improved humans, why not release them?" Varn considered the question thoughtfully. "Because they are incomplete," he said. "Phase 4 requires external environmental exposure. Real-world survival trials." Mara's blood froze. "You're planning to release them into the public?" she asked. "Eventually," he said calmly. The final rivet on Mara's restraint shifted slightly. Almost loose. Ruiz pressed forward. "And us?" Varn's gaze shifted back toward them. "You represent an unexpected variable," he said. Mara's heart pounded. "And variables," Varn continued softly, "must be studied." He reached for a syringe filled with a cloudy amber liquid. Mara twisted her wrist again, harder this time. The rivet snapped free. Her hand slid loose from the restraint. But she didn't move. Not yet. Varn approached her table slowly, syringe poised. "This compound enhances memory recall under extreme stress," he explained. "I'm curious how law enforcement training responds to induced survival trauma." He reached for her arm. Mara exploded into motion. She ripped her second restraint free and swung her freed hand upward, knocking the syringe from Varn's grasp. It shattered against the floor, amber liquid splattering across sterile tiles. Ruiz shouted, jerking violently against his own restraints. Varn staggered back, shock flashing across his face for the first time. Mara lunged off the table, pain screaming through her weakened muscles as her feet hit the ground unsteadily. Alarms erupted instantly. Red emergency lights began flashing overhead. Varn recovered quickly, slamming his palm against a wall panel. Security doors began sliding shut around the lab. "Mara!" Ruiz yelled. She spun back toward him, fumbling with his restraints as the mechanical doors thundered downward across the exits. "Hold still!" she shouted, yanking at the locking mechanisms. Behind them, Varn grabbed a secondary control device from his coat pocket. "You cannot leave this facility," he said coldly. "You are integral to the research." The final exit door slammed halfway shut. Mara ripped Ruiz's last restraint loose. "Run!" she shouted. They bolted toward the narrowing doorway, just as automated containment barriers began sliding down around the room. Behind them, the survivors in the observation chamber began screaming, raw, broken sounds of panic echoing through the facility. And as Mara and Ruiz dove beneath the descending steel barrier, alarms howling around them, they both knew one horrifying truth. Dr. Elias Varn wasn't just running experiments. He was preparing something far worse. The steel containment door slammed behind Mara and Ruiz with a deafening crash that echoed through the corridor like a gunshot fired inside a tomb. For a moment, neither of them moved. They simply lay sprawled across the cold floor, lungs dragging in desperate, burning breaths while the shriek of facility alarms pulsed through the walls around them. Red emergency lights strobed overhead, turning the corridor into a flickering nightmare of blood-colored shadows. Ruiz rolled onto his side first, clutching his ribs. "You okay?" Mara gasped. He winced, forcing himself upright. "Define okay." She gave a breathless half-laugh despite the terror flooding her veins. "We're alive," she said. "Barely counts," he replied, pushing himself to his feet. The escape corridor. The hallway stretched long and narrow, lined with identical reinforced doors stamped with coded serial numbers. The air smelled sterile, chemical disinfectant mixed with faint electrical ozone from the alarm systems. Mara staggered forward, one hand braced against the wall as her legs struggled to regain full strength. "Which way?" Ruiz asked. Mara scanned the corridor quickly. Emergency lighting strips along the floor pulsed in directional patterns, likely guiding facility personnel toward evacuation routes or security choke points. She knelt beside one panel, studying the blinking sequence. "These lights aren't guiding people out," she said quietly. Ruiz frowned. "Then where are they guiding them?" Mara swallowed. toward containment zones. The facility reacts. Behind them, the steel door they escaped through suddenly vibrated violently as mechanical locks re-engaged and sealed permanently. The overhead speakers crackled to life with a calm, automated voice. Collapse protocol initiated. All research personnel report to preservation chambers immediately. All test subjects will be terminated. Ruiz froze. Did it just say terminated? Mara nodded grimly. Varn's destroying evidence. Ruiz stared back toward the sealed lab door. Those survivors. We're not leaving them, Mara said firmly. Searching for the survivors. They sprinted down the corridor, scanning door labels rapidly. Each room contained different experimental environments, extreme cold chambers, sensory deprivation tanks, low oxygen simulation pods. Most stood empty. Some contained bodies. Ruiz slowed as they passed one partially open room. Inside, a figure lay strapped to an upright support frame, skin pale and unmoving. Mara grabbed his arm. "We don't have time," she whispered. His jaw tightened as he nodded reluctantly. Security awakens. Footsteps thundered somewhere deeper inside the corridor, multiple sets, moving fast. Security teams. Mara grabbed a metal fire suppression tool mounted on the wall and handed Ruiz a heavy oxygen tank canister from a storage alcove. "Improvised weapons," she said. Ruiz gave a dry grin. "I miss my service pistol." First confrontation. 3 security operatives rounded the far hallway corner, dressed in black tactical gear with full-face respirator masks. Their weapons were stun carbines, designed to incapacitate rather than kill. "Subjects escaped," one shouted. Electric bolts fired down the corridor, sizzling through the air. Mara and Ruiz dove behind a reinforced equipment cart as bolts struck the wall, sending sparks showering around them. Ruiz hurled the oxygen canister down the hallway with all his strength. It slammed into the lead guard, knocking him off balance long enough for Mara to charge forward. She swung the suppression tool across another guard's weapon arm, sending the stun rifle clattering across the floor. Ruiz tackled the third guard, both crashing into a glass observation window that shattered beneath their combined weight. Within seconds, all 3 guards lay unconscious. Mara grabbed one of the dropped carbines. "Let's move." The observation gallery. They reached the survivor observation wing moments later. The thick glass panels separating the containment room from the hallway shimmered under emergency lighting. Inside, chaos had erupted. The 5 survivors were no longer sitting quietly. They paced frantically, clawing at invisible patterns along the walls, whispering incoherent fragments of speech. One man slammed his forehead repeatedly against the glass, leaving streaks of blood. Mara's chest tightened. She located the control console beside the chamber door. The screen displayed a biometric lock requiring staff clearance. Ruiz examined the unconscious guard's wrist. "Badge access," he said, yanking off the guard's identification chip. He pressed it against the scanner. The door clicked. Slowly, it slid open. Inside the broken mines. The moment Mara stepped inside, every survivor froze simultaneously. 5 pairs of hollow, hyper-alert eyes locked onto her like animals sensing an unfamiliar predator. "It's okay," she said softly, raising her empty hands. "We're getting you out." None of them responded. One woman suddenly whispered something over and over under her breath. Mara leaned closer, trying to understand. "Clock resets, clock resets, clock resets." Ruiz approached carefully. "We need to move them before the facility shuts down." Mara nodded. "Help me guide them." She gently reached for the nearest survivor's shoulder. He flinched violently, but didn't pull away. Step by step, they began escorting them toward the corridor. The collapse begins. Suddenly, the entire facility trembled. Dust rained from overhead ceiling panels. Emergency sirens shifted into a deeper, more urgent tone. Overhead speakers announced, "Structural purge commencing in 5 minutes. All sectors will be sealed and incinerated." Ruiz's eyes widened. "Incinerated?" "Varn's erasing everything," Mara said. Dr. Varn's last move. As they reached the corridor with the survivors, hallway security doors slammed shut ahead of them. Thick fireproof barriers sealed each intersection one by one. At the far end of the corridor, a massive blast door began lowering toward the floor, and standing beside its control panel was Dr. Elias Varn. Calm, composed. watching them approach as if observing a predictable experiment outcome. "You are disrupting critical research," he said evenly. Mara raised the stun carbine. "Open the exit." Varn shook his head slightly. "The facility cannot be exposed. Its data must be preserved." Ruiz shouted, "You're about to burn living people alive." Varn adjusted his glasses calmly. "They are already statistically deceased." The final standoff. The blast door continued descending slowly behind him. Mara stepped forward, weapon raised. "Move. Now." Varn reached into his coat and pressed a small handheld transmitter. Instantly, two automated defense turrets unfolded from the ceiling behind Mara and Ruiz, targeting them with rotating red laser sights. The survivors began screaming, their fragile minds unraveling further under the sensory overload. Mara's pulse hammered. If she fired, the turrets would likely kill them all. If she didn't, the blast door would seal their only escape route. The survivor's choice. Suddenly, one of the survivors, the man who had whispered "run" earlier, stepped forward. His trembling hands reached toward a secondary control console embedded in the hallway wall. Mara noticed too late. "Wait," she shouted. But the man slammed his palm against the panel. The turrets froze, then powered down completely. Varn's eyes widened for the first time. "What did you do?" he demanded. The survivor turned slowly toward Mara. His hollow eyes flickered with brief, fragile clarity. "Observed long enough," he whispered. Behind him, sparks erupted from the control panel as he collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing violently from electrical feedback. Mara lunged forward, dragging him back toward the group. "Ruiz, get the others moving." Ruiz forced the remaining survivors toward the narrowing gap beneath the blast door. Varn's escape. As the final survivor cleared the doorway, Mara turned back toward Varn. But he was already retreating down a secondary maintenance tunnel behind the control panel. Their eyes locked for one final moment. "You've delayed inevitability," he said quietly before disappearing into darkness. The blast door slammed shut between them. Fleeing the inferno, Mara grabbed the fallen survivor, slinging his arm over her shoulder as Ruiz helped guide the others through the collapsing corridors. Fire suppression systems began flooding sections of the facility with chemical foam. Explosions thundered in distant research wings as structural demolition charges activated. The walls themselves seemed to groan under the pressure. "We're not going to make it," Ruiz muttered, scanning the twisting escape tunnels ahead. Mara tightened her grip on the injured survivor. "Yes," she said fiercely. "We are." The emergency exit shaft. At the corridor's end, they discovered a vertical maintenance ladder stretching upward into darkness. Emergency exit. Ruiz helped the survivors climb first, guiding them rung by rung as the facility continued collapsing beneath them. Mara climbed last, the injured survivor strapped to her back, every muscle screaming in protest as she forced herself upward. Below them, flames began crawling through the tunnel system like living creatures consuming everything in their path. Emerging into night, after what felt like hours of climbing, the hatch above them burst open under Ruiz's shove. Cool night air flooded downward. One by one, they crawled out onto the forest floor miles outside Briar Hollow. Behind them, the ground trembled. And then, the earth itself collapsed inward as the underground facility imploded beneath the surface, swallowing the core into a burning crater of dust and flame. Mara collapsed onto the grass, chest heaving, staring at the stars above. Ruiz dropped beside her, coughing violently. Around them, the survivors sat in stunned silence, staring blankly into the dark forest. They were alive, but shattered. And somewhere, Dr. Elias Varn was still out there. The forest around the collapsed core site glowed faintly with distant emergency lights as helicopters circled overhead, their search beams slicing through the night like surgical blades. Sirens wailed from approaching rescue convoys, pushing through the dirt access roads carved hastily by emergency responders. Mara Ellison sat wrapped in a thermal blanket beside a portable medical tent, her body trembling with delayed shock and exhaustion. Dirt and dried blood coated her hands, and her lungs still burned from the chemical mist she'd inhaled hours earlier. Across from her, Ruiz sat on the rear bumper of an ambulance, oxygen mask dangling loosely around his neck as paramedics examined the deep bruising along his ribs. Between them, the 5 rescued survivors sat silently under floodlights, each wrapped in identical gray emergency blankets. They barely reacted to the chaos around them. Their eyes darted constantly, tracking invisible threats only they could see. Lila Monroe arrived just as dawn began bleeding faint gray into the eastern sky. She jumped out of the first police convoy vehicle before it had fully stopped. "Mara," she called. Mara looked up, relief flashing across her exhausted face. Lila rushed forward and pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her for several long seconds before stepping back to scan her for injuries. "You scared the hell out of us," Lila said, her voice rough. Mara gave a faint, tired smile. "You should see the other guy." The collapse assessment. Federal agents, state investigators, and emergency structural engineers swarmed the crater left behind by the destroyed underground facility. Steam rose from fissures in the ground where demolition charges had caved in entire tunnel networks. Sheriff Crow stood beside a large holographic projection table erected inside the mobile command tent. The 3D scan displayed the collapsed core facility, like a shattered spiderweb beneath Briar Hollow. 70% of the tunnel system is gone, Crow said grimly as Lila, Mara, and Ruiz joined him. Anything below the core level is completely inaccessible. Ruiz frowned. "What about evidence?" Crow sighed. "Burned, buried, or flooded. Varn made sure of it." Mara crossed her arms tightly. "Not all of it. The survivor testimony." Hours later, forensic psychologists and trauma specialists attempted to interview the rescued survivors inside a secured field medical unit. Most of them remained unresponsive, rocking or whispering fragmented phrases. Except one, the man who had disabled the turret systems. He sat upright on the medical cot, staring at the floor while two specialists carefully monitored his neurological responses. His skin was pale and stretched thin over his cheekbones, but his eyes held a fragile spark of awareness. Mara and Lila entered quietly. The man's gaze slowly lifted toward them. "You escaped," he said hoarsely. Mara nodded gently. "Thanks to you." He blinked slowly, as if processing the memory through heavy fog. "They called me Unit 11, he whispered. "I don't remember my name." Lila crouched beside him. "That's okay. You don't have to remember everything right now." He swallowed hard. "I remember meetings before the cages." Mara leaned forward immediately. "What kind of meetings?" His eyes trembled slightly. "Men and women dressed like politicians, corporate people. They watched us through glass." Dr. Varn answered to them. Ruiz leaned closer. "Did you hear names?" The man nodded weakly. "Not names, symbols. They wore pins, triangle pins, gold triangles." Mara and Lila exchanged a dark glance. The recovered evidence drive. Back at the mobile command center, digital forensic analysts worked feverishly to recover partial data fragments retrieved from emergency backup servers found near the tunnel entrance before the collapse. One analyst waved Lila over urgently. "You need to see this." She pulled up a decrypted folder labeled Project Convergence. Inside were financial transaction records, millions of dollars transferred through shell corporations, offshore banking systems, and anonymous research grants. Ruiz scanned the documents, his brow tightening. "This funding didn't come from criminals," he said quietly. "This is institutional money." Mara leaned closer to the screen. Logos flickered across the recovered files. Private pharmaceutical companies, defense research contractors, government-adjacent consulting agencies, and one redacted department seal that made Lila's stomach drop. "Defense Behavioral Advancement Council," she whispered. Ruiz looked at her. "You've heard of them?" "Only in classified briefings," she said. "They fund experimental psychological warfare studies." Mara's voice lowered. Varn wasn't just experimenting. He was building weaponized survivors, Ruiz finished. The missing data blocks. The analyst scrolled deeper into the recovered drive. "Most of the files are corrupted," he said. "But there's one section Varn protected with higher encryption." He tapped several keys, revealing a partially restored timeline chart. Phase 1, Behavioral Observation, completed. Phase 2, Environmental Adaptation, completed. Phase 3, Population Sampling, completed. Phase 4, Public Integration Trials, in progress. Mara's breath caught. "Public integration?" she repeated. Lila stared at the screen, dread creeping into her chest. They planned to release survivors back into society. Ruiz shook his head slowly. "Not survivors. Conditioned subjects, Mara said. The financial trail. Further forensic tracing revealed payment authorizations, signed by a rotating board of anonymous donors operating under a single project alias. The Triangle Consortium. Each signature was replaced with the same triangular emblem, described by Unit 11. Crow stepped closer, reading over their shoulders. This wasn't one man, he said quietly. No, Lila agreed. It was an entire network. The surveillance revelation. Another recovered folder contained satellite surveillance logs. Most footage had been wiped, but one clip remained partially intact. The footage showed a remote airstrip located hundreds of miles outside Briar Hollow. A cargo aircraft sat on the runway, while unmarked vans delivered secured containment crates toward the loading ramp. The timestamp was dated 2 weeks before the core facility collapse. Ruiz's voice tightened. Those crates could have held subjects. Or research materials, Mara said. Lila zoomed into the aircraft's tail number, barely visible beneath mud and paint scratches. She froze. I've seen this aircraft before, she said slowly. Black site prisoner transfers. Off-the-grid transportation. No flight logs. No official existence. The vanishing doctor. Meanwhile, federal search teams scoured nearby towns, highways, and airports for any trace of Dr. Elias Varn. They found nothing. His home residence had been abandoned years earlier. His academic credentials had been erased from several institutional archives. Even his birth records had been partially sealed under classified documentation. It was as if Varn had already prepared for disappearance long before the core collapsed. The survivor's warning. That evening, Mara returned to the medical unit to check on Unit 11 again. He looked weaker now, for tubes feeding stabilizing fluids into his arms. His breathing had grown shallow, his fragile mind flickering between clarity and detachment. You saved us, Mara said softly. He shook his head faintly. No, I delayed them. Mara frowned. What do you mean? His eyes filled with quiet terror. The consortium doesn't stop projects when they fail, he whispered. They relocate them. Mara's chest tightened. Do you know where? He swallowed hard. They talked about secondary sites. One called Harbor Facility. Harbor where? She pressed gently. His gaze drifted unfocused. I don't know. I only heard waves, water, metal doors. His breathing stuttered, machines beside him beeping rapidly as nurses rushed in to stabilize him. Mara stepped back slowly, heart racing. The new threat emerges. Later that night, Lila gathered the entire investigative command team inside the mobile operations trailer. She placed the recovered data files, survivor testimony reports, and aircraft surveillance images across the table. This investigation is no longer about Briar Hollow, she said firmly. This is national-level trafficking, psychological experimentation, and coordinated government-adjacent corruption. Crow folded his arms grimly. And our suspect is gone. Mara stepped forward. Not gone, she said. Relocated. Ruiz nodded slowly. If Harbor Facility exists, Varn's probably already there. Lila stared at the blinking aircraft surveillance image one last time. And if Phase 4 is still active, she said quietly, then conditioned survivors could already be walking freely among the public. The room fell into heavy silence. Outside, emergency crews continued working around the smoldering crater where the core had once stood. But everyone inside that trailer understood the same horrifying truth. They hadn't stopped the operation. They had only exposed its surface. Rain fell steadily across the Briar Hollow command site, turning the forest clearing into a patchwork of mud, tire tracks, and flickering emergency floodlights. The crater where the core facility had collapsed smoldered quietly now, steam curling upward into the gray dawn like breath from a dying giant. Inside the mobile command trailer, tension hung thick enough to suffocate conversation. Mara Ellison stood beside the evidence board, staring at the phrase written in bold black marker across the center. Harbor Facility, location unknown. Below it, photographs, data fragments, financial charts, and satellite stills formed a tangled web of connections that grew more complicated by the hour. Ruiz sat at a laptop, scrubbing through surveillance databases while forensic analysts worked behind him, cross-referencing cargo flight records and maritime shipping manifests. Lila Monroe paced slowly across the narrow trailer floor, her arms folded tightly. Update, she said. Ruiz didn't look up. Still tracking the aircraft tail number. It's ghosted through 5 international registries, but I'm narrowing down refueling stops. Anything matching coastal access? Mara asked. Ruiz nodded faintly. That's the problem. Too many. The first incident. A sharp radio call broke through the trailer's internal speakers. Command, we have a developing situation in Westbrook County. Possible mass casualty event at a commuter terminal. Local police are requesting federal coordination. Lila grabbed the radio immediately. Details? Witness reports describe a single male individual attacking civilians without provocation. Subject appears non-responsive to pain compliance. For injured, too critical. Mara's stomach twisted. Description, she asked. The dispatcher hesitated. Subject was found wandering near the transit station hours before the attack, wearing hospital-style gray clothing. The trailer fell silent. Ruiz slowly turned toward them. Phase 4, he whispered. The survivor pattern. Within 30 minutes, a live police drone feed streamed onto the command trailer monitor. The footage showed a chaotic transit platform cordoned off by emergency responders. At the center of the scene, paramedics loaded a restrained man onto a stretcher. His limbs jerked violently against straps as he whispered rapid, fragmented phrases. Mara leaned closer to the screen. The man's pale skin, the hollow, darting eyes, the gray clothing. It's one of them, she said quietly. Lila's jaw clenched. Released or escaped? Ruiz shook his head grimly. Does it matter? Analyzing the trigger. Psychological specialists began reviewing the drone audio feed. The restrained man's whispering was isolated and enhanced through audio software. The translated fragments scrolled across the screen. Clock resets, test continues, exposure complete, subject released. Mara's breath caught. They weren't just surviving isolation, she said. They were programmed. Ruiz nodded. Behavioral triggers. Environmental stimuli. Possibly violent response conditioning. Lila turned sharply toward the operations team. I want every unsolved violent incident within the last 6 months cross-referenced against missing persons connected to transit routes, medical discharges, or unidentified vagrancy reports. The cargo flight breakthrough. Hours later, Ruiz finally sat upright, eyes locked on his laptop. I found it. Mara and Lila rushed over. Ruiz pulled up a digital flight route reconstruction. The ghost aircraft had landed at 3 undocumented airstrips before disappearing entirely from radar logs. But one location stood out. A private cargo dock on the Atlantic coastline, registered under a maritime research company called North Star Oceanic Development. Ruiz zoomed in. Satellite imagery revealed a sprawling harbor complex, reinforced loading cranes, submarine docking tunnels, and several sealed warehouse structures built directly into coastal cliffs. Mara whispered, harbor facility. The North Star illusion. Financial investigators quickly uncovered North Star's corporate structure. It had no employees, no active research projects, and no tax records indicating legitimate business operations. Instead, it functioned as a financial laundering shell tied directly to the Triangle Consortium's funding network. Lila stared at the satellite images, dread coiling deeper inside her chest. They moved everything offshore, she said. Harder to track, easier to bury. Ruiz leaned closer to the imagery. There's more. He adjusted the resolution, revealing faint movement near the cliffside loading bays. Thermal signatures, he said quietly. Multiple. Mara swallowed hard. How many? Dozens, Ruiz replied. The pattern expands. While preparations for a coastal operation began, federal analysts delivered new intelligence. 3 additional violent incidents had occurred across separate states within the last 2 weeks. Each attacker matched the same profile. Disoriented, emotionally detached, whispering fragmented phrases tied to experimental conditioning. All wore identical gray garments. Mara's hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the case files. They're already releasing subjects, she said. Ruiz nodded grimly. Testing behavioral integration under real-world stress. Lila's voice dropped to a whisper. They're measuring public reaction, casualty response, law enforcement containment speed. Unit 11's final clarity. That night, Mara returned to the medical unit where Unit 11 lay stabilized but fading. His breathing had grown shallow, and neurological monitors showed deteriorating brain activity. His eyes flickered open when Mara approached. "They're moving them," he whispered weakly. "Who?" she asked gently. "The consortium," he replied. "They rotate sites every cycle. Every failure becomes new data." Mara leaned closer. "What happens at Harbor Facility?" His eyes trembled with fear. "That's where they finish the conditioning. That's where they select which subjects become releases and which become storage." Mara's throat tightened. "Storage?" He nodded faintly. "On ships, underwater compartments, sealed permanent." Her stomach dropped. "You mean they're holding survivors at sea?" His gaze drifted unfocused. Deep water cages, no rescue, no record, just observation. His voice faded into silence as monitors beeped steadily beside him. Mara gripped his hand gently as he slipped back into unconsciousness. The strike decision. By dawn, Federal Tactical Command approved a joint operation targeting the North Star Harbor complex. Naval support units prepared coastal blockade positions while Federal strike teams assembled aerial assault plans. Inside the operations trailer, Lila studied the assault blueprint while Mara and Ruiz geared up with tactical equipment. "This isn't just a rescue anymore," Lila said quietly. "If Harbor Facility exists, it's the central hub of the consortium's operations." Ruiz locked a fresh magazine into his sidearm. "Then we shut it down." Mara tightened her body armor straps, her voice steady but cold. "And we find Varn." The final transmission. As strike helicopters prepared for launch from a nearby military airfield, communications officers intercepted a brief encrypted broadcast transmitted from offshore satellite relays. The signal repeated a single phrase over and over before cutting out. Ruiz translated the audio fragments as they played across the operations screen. Phase 4 escalation authorized. Surface exposure expanding. New subjects deploying. The room fell silent. Lila stared at the glowing transmission text. "They're accelerating," she whispered. Mara grabbed her helmet, eyes burning with determination. "Then we move faster." The harbor looms. Hours later, the assault fleet cut through heavy Atlantic fog toward the North Star Harbor complex. Massive cliffside structures emerged from the mist like the skeletal remains of a forgotten fortress. Floodlights illuminated reinforced dock entrances carved directly into rock walls. Cargo cranes moved slowly along overhead tracks, loading sealed metal containers onto a partially submerged transport vessel waiting offshore. Through binoculars, Mara spotted movement along the loading platforms. Gray garments. Dozens of them. "Subjects," she said quietly. Ruiz lowered his scope, his face pale. "They're not just testing Phase 4 anymore," he said. "They're mass deploying it." As the strike helicopters roared overhead and tactical teams prepared to descend onto the harbor facility, Mara felt the same cold realization settle deep inside her chest. Dr. Elias Varn was only one architect. The Triangle Consortium was building something far larger. And if Harbor fell, there was no guarantee it would end the experiment. The Atlantic fog rolled thick and heavy across the water as the Federal strike fleet closed in on the North Star Harbor complex. From a distance, the cliffside installation looked like a black wound carved into the coastline. Steel docks, reinforced cargo towers, and massive submarine loading tunnels glowing faintly beneath rows of floodlights. Above, 3 assault helicopters circled silently, rotors slicing through mist as tactical teams prepared to descend. Inside the lead helicopter, Mara Ellison sat strapped into her harness, helmet pressed tight against her ears as the aircraft rattled with turbulent crosswinds. Across from her, Ruiz loaded his final magazine, the metallic clicks of ammunition echoing through the cramped cabin. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Below them, the largest operation of their careers waited, and possibly the final chance to stop something that had already begun spreading beyond control. The harbor revealed. As the helicopters dropped altitude, the facility came into full view. Cargo cranes moved methodically along overhead tracks, lifting large reinforced containers from the cliffside tunnels and lowering them onto a partially submerged transport vessel anchored offshore. Armed security teams patrolled the loading docks, their movements mechanical and precise. Through her tactical scope, Mara spotted rows of individuals standing motionless near the tunnel entrance. Gray garments, expressionless faces. Dozens of them. Confirmed visual, she said into her headset. Subjects present. Large-scale transfer underway. Lila's voice responded through the comm line from the command ship anchored miles offshore. Strike authorization granted. Rescue priority. Evidence preservation secondary. Terminate hostile resistance only if necessary. Ruiz glanced at Mara. Here we go, he muttered. The assault begins. The helicopter doors slid open. Cold ocean air roared inside as tactical ropes dropped toward the dock platforms below. One by one, Federal agents descended through the fog like shadows falling from the sky. Mara followed, sliding rapidly down the rope before landing hard against the slick steel dock. Ruiz dropped beside her seconds later. Teams Alpha and Bravo moving to cargo tunnels, the tactical commander announced through comms. Gunfire erupted almost instantly. Security teams fired stun carbines toward the descending agents, electric bolts sizzling through the air. Tactical shields deployed as agents returned fire with non-lethal rounds designed to incapacitate without killing. Mara and Ruiz sprinted toward the tunnel entrance where the gray-clad subjects stood unmoving despite the chaos around them. They're not reacting, Ruiz said, stunned. Mara slowed cautiously as they approached. The subjects' eyes tracked them slowly, alert, aware, but detached. Get medical teams ready, Mara called into comms. We've got mass trauma victims. Inside the harbor core, the tunnel entrance led into a massive underground docking chamber carved directly into the coastal cliffs. Rows of containment cells lined the walls, many occupied by silent figures staring outward through reinforced glass. Ruiz's voice shook slightly. How many? Mara scanned the endless rows. Hundreds, she whispered. Alarms blared deeper within the facility as strike teams advanced. Security resistance intensified near the central control hub located at the far end of the chamber. And standing inside the elevated control balcony above the docking floor was Dr. Elias Varn. He watched the assault unfold with disturbing calm, hands clasped behind his back as if observing a scheduled demonstration rather than a catastrophic breach. Mara raised her weapon. Varn, she shouted. His gaze shifted toward her. Recognition flickered across his face. Detective Ellison, he said through the chamber's amplified speaker system. You persist impressively. The truth exposed. Mara stepped forward, voice echoing through the cavern. It's over, she said. Your funding, your facilities, your experiments, they're exposed. Varn smiled faintly. You believe this facility represents the entirety of the project? He asked. Ruiz aimed his weapon toward the balcony. You're done, Doctor. Varn tapped a control console beside him. Massive holographic displays flickered to life across the chamber walls, projecting maps covered in blinking red markers scattered across continents. Mara's breath caught. Secondary facilities, Varn said calmly. Tertiary observation sites, maritime containment vessels, psychological integration trials across multiple nations. Ruiz stared at the glowing map in horror. You're global, he whispered. Varn nodded slightly. The Triangle Consortium funds research where governments lack courage, he said. Human adaptability is the next evolutionary battlefield. Emotional dependency must be eliminated to prepare humanity for future environmental collapse and societal instability. Mara's voice trembled with fury. You tortured innocent people for theoretical survival models. Varn's expression hardened slightly. Progress demands sacrifice. The consortium revealed. Behind Varn, additional figures stepped into view, 3 individuals dressed in identical dark formal attire. Each wore a small gold triangular pin on their lapel. Consortium representatives. One of them stepped forward, speaking calmly into the chamber-wide speaker system. Dr. Varn has fulfilled his research phase. Your interference merely accelerates public integration trials. Mara's heart pounded. You're admitting responsibility? The representative smiled faintly. We are acknowledging inevitability. The final override. Ruiz glanced toward Mara. We need to shut down their transfer systems. Now. Mara nodded and sprinted toward the main control access staircase, while tactical teams engaged security forces across the docking floor. Gunfire echoed violently through the chamber. Stun rounds and flash grenades exploded across catwalks and loading platforms as agents pushed toward the balcony. Mara reached the control console seconds before Varn activated a final sequence on his terminal. Containment purge initiated, the system announced. Steel blast doors began sealing tunnel exits around the chamber. Varn! Mara shouted. He turned toward her one last time. You cannot stop evolution, he said quietly. Then he pressed a final key. The doctor's end. Suddenly, emergency water pressure systems ruptured along the docking bay walls. Ocean water burst through pre-weakened structural panels, flooding the lower chamber with explosive force. Varn stepped backward toward a sealed escape elevator behind the balcony. Mara lunged forward, tackling him before the doors closed. They crashed against the console, both struggling violently. Varn grabbed a concealed injector from his sleeve, jamming it toward Mara's neck. Ruiz fired a precise stun round from below. The bolt struck Varn directly in the chest, sending him collapsing to the floor, unconscious. The escape elevator doors sealed behind him permanently as water levels surged upward across the chamber floor. The harbor collapse. Emergency evacuation alarms blared as structural collapse began spreading through the flooded docking tunnels. Tactical teams rushed to escort survivors toward evacuation helicopters and naval rescue boats. Mara and Ruiz dragged the unconscious Varn toward the extraction zone as water swallowed the lower containment cells, releasing hundreds of subjects into chaotic rescue operations. Above the crashing waves and collapsing steel, helicopters descended rapidly, lifting survivors and agents from the flooding docks. As Mara climbed aboard the final evacuation craft, she glanced back at the sinking harbor facility disappearing beneath rising Atlantic tides. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe it might finally be over. The aftermath. Weeks later, Dr. Elias Varn sat inside a maximum security federal detention facility under constant surveillance. International investigations erupted across political, military, and corporate sectors as the Triangle Consortium's financial networks surfaced in global corruption scandals. Hundreds of survivors received medical and psychological rehabilitation. Public exposure of the program triggered global outrage. But not closure. The final discovery. Late one evening, Mara sat inside the Federal Investigation Headquarters reviewing classified files alongside Lila and Ruiz. New intelligence reports had arrived from international maritime patrol units. Ruiz read the summary aloud slowly. Unregistered cargo vessel detected in Arctic waters. No crew. Containment structures located inside sealed subdecks. Thermal scans indicate multiple human signatures. Mara's stomach tightened. Lila placed another file onto the table. Satellite imagery showing additional vessels scattered across remote ocean coordinates worldwide. Each vessel bore the same triangular insignia painted faintly along its hull. Floating facilities, Lila whispered. Ruiz exhaled slowly. They didn't just build laboratories. They built an ocean network, Mara finished. The whisper that remains. Later that night, Mara returned home for the first time in months. She stood alone in her dark apartment, staring out across the city skyline glowing under quiet rain. Her phone buzzed softly in her hand. A secure message from an unknown sender appeared on the screen. Attached was a single audio file. Mara hesitated, then pressed play. Static crackled through the speaker before a faint, distorted voice whispered softly. Phase 4 continues. The message cut to silence. Mara stared at the screen as rain tapped against the window behind her. Somewhere out there, subjects were still being released, still being observed, still being studied, and the Triangle Consortium was still watching. The ocean tides continued to rise and fall endlessly beyond the distant coastline, carrying secrets no investigation could ever fully uncover.